Welcome back to She Can, where women lead by example by telling their stories of how they got to where they are today, to support and guide others, because it's easier to be what you can see. And I'm very excited to talk to Kate Daly today. Kate, welcome to She Can. You're the co-founder and host of the Divorce Podcast. You're also the co-founder at Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples powered by Octopus Money. You're a relationship counselor, a divorce expert, a successful tech entrepreneur, and a startup mentor. You believe in the power of teams, the importance of diversity, and you're very passionate about helping people separate in an amicable way. Tell us a bit more about your story, Kate, and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. I'm not a big fan of career plans, so I've never had a career plan that I've kind of followed, or if I do this, I'll get here. My career, probably like lots of people's, has just sort of happened, and it's been a bit of a mishmash of experiences. But I suppose I'm a passionate believer that all roads lead to here. And careers are shaped not just by the jobs that you do, but by the relationships that you have and life more generally as well. So I guess I am here because a series of triumphs and disasters, and I hope they've sort of balanced themselves out, but it's definitely the disasters that ultimately you cut your teeth on. And for me, starting Amicable and doing the Divorce Podcast has come from my own experience of a really horrible and nasty divorce. I've been divorced twice. And so not many people can claim expertise in quite the way that maybe I can, in the sense that I've come at it from both a personal and a professional stance. And I think it's that personal experience that's probably shaped a lot of what you see in the Amicable service and the Amicable products today. But I started as a psychology graduate with a desire to work in prisons. And I was absolutely passionate about prison psychology and spent most of my final year traipsing around all of the Category A prisons in the United Kingdom, which is a bit of a strange one. But the year I graduated was a recession. And so the civil service weren't taking graduates at that point. So like all good businesses and people, you have to pivot. And so I went and did some management training with Marks and Spencer. And that gave me a real good commercial insight. And it allowed me to get commercial skills that I probably wouldn't have had I not done that. And that's definitely helped shaped my career, because when you go ultimately into a caring profession, to be able to mix a caring kind of mindset with a commercial background actually becomes quite powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful for my M&S training, even though I was most definitely a square peg in a round hole. It didn't fit very well for me, so from a personal perspective, but it was great training. And from there, I went to KPMG and I worked in change management. And that really reignited my passion and desire to understand more about human behavior. So after I left KPMG, I went back to university and I got my postgrad in psychology. And then from there, I started to become a relationship counsellor. And I had my own private practice helping people at the end of a relationship, and specifically at relationship breakdown. So I sort of really got my bearings doing that. And as I was being, a relationship therapist, my own relationship was breaking down, my second marriage. And I'd had children, so it was messy, and my ex was very difficult, and it was all very emotional and hard. And so because of that, I spent quite a lot of time trying to find the right help and support for my own divorce. And it became very apparent doing that actually there wasn't very much out there, and that all there was out there was a series of very legal kind of responses to divorce and separation. And I think kind of having been forced down a very legalistic route and sort of come out the other end, having spent a huge amount of money and having lost emotionally my sense of self, and watched the children and my ex and our families all become very entrenched and bitter, I just started to wonder why the legal system, particularly in this country, seemed to push you down that route, and why that was deemed to be kind of a good outcome.
Yeah.
And it made me very soul searchy, I guess. And I started to think about, well, what if you could do it a different way? And so the idea for Amicable started to form from that experience. So that combination of the personal experience, and obviously then looking around and thinking, well, I'm in this space, and I think divorce is an emotional issue with legal and financial consequences, yet we treat it like a legal issue, and the service we give people is a legal service. But actually, what people really need, if they're going to make these life-changing decisions, is emotional support and emotional clarity, because that's what then is the bedrock for making good decisions. So it was really seeing it in a very different way.
Kate, I'm so grateful for your amicable that's really here for the greater good, and it's trying to build bridges in a industry that's divisive and aggressive, and exactly along the legal terms as you said earlier. So tell us a little bit more about amicable and about being a tech entrepreneur.
So when we started out, so I guess the biggest thing about being in this space is that, and I guess this might ring true with a lot of people, when you're starting a business, you can have a business built out of a passion or a real understanding that there is something missing in the market. And that's kind of where the idea came from for me. That is a small bit. If you imagine like setting up a business as an iceberg, that's the bit that maybe sticks out of the water.
Yeah.
Underneath that are a whole bunch of skills and disciplines that you need to actually run a business. And I was very clear that I had the passion and the idea, but I definitely didn't have all of those skills under the water that I would need if I was going to make this scalable. And one of the first things I had to really think about when setting up Amicable was, is this just passion project, something I'm going to do in my own little corner of Southwest London, or is this something that actually I want to make into a proper business,
Mm.
and I want to be able to scale, and I want to be able to help masses of people rather than just a few neighbors, essentially. So I made that decision early on, and that was a very conscious decision that actually I needed to get some additional skills into the business if it was going to be a business rather than just a one man band passion project.
Yeah.
So that's when my co-founder came in. I knew Pip, who is the co-founder of Amicable. We would been friends for a very long time. And that was quite a hard decision to make, because do you really want to go into business with a close friend? It's a big deal to actually say yes to that. So when I floated the idea to Pip and talked about how I wanted to run this business and what I wanted to do, we spent a lot of time actually thinking about whether it was the right thing to do as two friends to run a business together, and the impact that might have on our friendship. So that was really key to how Amicable formed. And ultimately, Pip brought to the table the experience of having founded a business already and sold it successfully. That was, so alluring to me. Somebody who had done it, she knew and would know what this startup journey would be about, and she would be able to help me. So I think whenever you're looking at this from an entrepreneurial side of things, some people may be brilliant and have both sets of skills inside them. I knew I didn't. And in some ways, if I have to say I've got a superpower, that's my superpower, knowing my limitations. And I think it's vital, if you're going to set up a business, you're going to ask people to invest in you and your business, you have to know your limitations. And that's not about being underconfident, and it's not about, having the world's greatest ego. It's finding the passion and the determination to be able to do something, but knowing when and where you need to get help. That's absolutely key. So I knew from the outset that this would need, if it was going to be successful, to be a co-founded business, and I needed somebody with the complementary skills. And I think that's probably what's been the bedrock of our success, is that we both bring something very different to the party. And so there isn't that sense of treading on each other's toes or anything like that. We have very separate skills. and the skill sets that we have are complementary. And we worked out very quickly. We had a very detailed agreement between us about how we'd break a deadlock and what would happen if we didn't agree and who would have the final say on different types of decisions. And again, it sounds very clinical, but it was very necessary. If we wanted to remain friends and run the business, then we had to have all of that sort of categorized. So we spent a lot of time at the beginning working through that and thinking through that, rather than just being hedonistic and going, yay, we're going to go into business together and it's going to be brilliant and we're going to have so much fun and it'll be fine because we're friends. We absolutely didn't do any of that. We did the entire opposite of it to make sure we could remain friends. And we had a rule early on that when we were out with other people, we wouldn't talk about the business, because that would be, boring for them. It's like talking about your failing relationship, isn't it? But it's the same kind of thing. You've only got so much kind of leeway with that. But yeah. So we made some rules. We stuck to the rules. Because we're very different, we've brought very different things to the business, and that really has been fundamental.
So tell us about the business itself, Kate. What does Amicable do exactly, and how does technology help people be kinder and better in divorcing or separating?
Okay. So the traditional model for divorcing is that you each go to two separate solicitors, and the solicitor has your back, your best interests at heart. And effectively, there's a proxy negotiation that goes on between solicitors. If you can't work that out, then the case goes to court and a judge decides on how you split your money and property and income when you get divorced and separated. And that creates two polarized positions. You go to your lawyer, they tell you the best case scenario. I go to mine, I hear my best case scenario. We're then at opposite ends of a scale. And whoever's got the best lawyer essentially gets the better deal. And that just doesn't feel very family friendly. So when we came at it, we said, well, in a family, there are no sides. So the whole idea of having a lawyer whose job it is, and it's not because they're mean, it's because that is their fundamental job. There's no point in representing an individual's best interests. What if we looked at this in terms of being a family and looked at doing a couple's piece rather than an individual's piece? Now, there's been mediation around for a long time. So it was kind of like, well, what's the difference to mediation? But mediation doesn't do all of the legal side of things. So what Amicable did for the first time ever was to allow a couples service to do all of the legals that a solicitor would do, but with a couple instead. And that was no easy ask, because that hadn't been done before. So we had to go to the High Court to prove that we were not breaking the law. So we were summoned in front of a High Court judge. And I'll never forget it, because it was like the 19th of December. So 2 weeks before Christmas, not even 2 weeks before Christmas. And we were stood at the High Court, and the judge said, ladies, you're before me to decide whether or not you are practicing illegally. And the penalty for practicing illegally is 2 years in prison. Well, I felt physically sick. I thought I was going to be sick at that point, thinking, oh my God, what on earth is going to happen if this isn't as we think? We hadn't just set up willy-nilly. We'd spent a lot of time with the regulatory authorities going through where the line was, how close we could go to the line without going over the line, and making sure that we had a service where we could work with couples rather than individuals, and there wouldn't be a conflict of interest, because from a legal perspective, that's the key point. There can't be a conflict of interest. So we spent time doing that. So I went in feeling quite confident, but the judge then said, well, I'm here to decide whether the regulatory advice you've been given is actually correct. And then I did start to worry, because I was thinking, well, if we've been to the regulator and the regulator's wrong, then there is no hope. But obviously I'm here and we've got a successful business. So the story ends well. It was a real David and Goliath moment. But essentially we were told it was legal for us to work with couples and to look at joint interests rather than individual interests. So it allowed us to create a service where you could have all of the legal stuff done, which you can't get in mediation, but you could have a more nurturing approach to separating by looking at joint interests. So we start, for example, by looking at what we call goals. So what do you want life to look like? when this is all done in a year or 2 years' time, or however long it takes you, what do you want life to be like? Where will you be? What will you be doing? Paint me a picture. That's where we start. And sometimes couples paint very different pictures, and that's fine. It's their personal goals. But that's what we work with. We work with goals and aspirations. And then we look at the reality. So we're following a coaching model, a very simple coaching model called GROW. So we start with the goals, we then look at the reality. And the reality is, what have you got to divide? What's in this pot that we call a marital pot? What are we talking about? House, pension, savings, income. What is it? What does it look like? So we categorize all of that. And then we say, well, look, if these are the goals, these are the resources you've got to play with. How could we split these goals to meet? How could we split these resources, to meet these goals? That gives us options. We look at the different options, we stress test them, we factor in the impact of children and all of that kind of thing and what family life looks like. And then we say, okay, this looks like the preferred option, and we help people navigate and negotiate the fine detail of that option. We then do all of the legal paperwork to sort out everything. So everything is done correctly, properly. It's legally binding. Nobody can go back and change their mind. Nobody can go back years later and ask for more. If there's an issue with anything that's been, agreed, the court can enforce the order. So you've got the same security, but you've done it in a very different way. And the important thing is, if you do it in a different way, you're able to co-parent your kids. You're not going to have that fight with your kids. Well, I can't possibly sit next to your father at your wedding or at this christening or at this graduation. You don't have that horrible sense of having, driven a bus through the family, where you can't be in the same room together, which is, where I've left off. I am not able to be in the room with my ex, and that's awful for my kids, and that's going to play out for the rest of their lives, or the rest of certainly mine and his life. So I just think it's just a better way of doing things. So coming at this from a child focused, family friendly perspective gives people options, and it allows you to do things in a very different way.
Kate, I'm so unbelievably impressed with what you've set up. And I understand it came from a personal struggle that then you turned into a real purpose. Tell us what tips you would have for people who are they're in the very early stages. They're thinking about maybe this is a breakdown of our relationship. What top tips would you have in those early stages?
I think the key thing is you have to create some headspace to think about this.
Mm.
All too often, life gets in the way, and we carry on sometimes for a long time in a broken or damaged relationship without really giving it much thought, because it's easier just to keep getting up and doing the same thing, and there isn't time, and life takes over and it's busy. But I think you get one life, and it doesn't have to be a stigma or a bad thing if you end a relationship. Ending a relationship is making a positive choice for a better life sometimes, and that's really important. So I think seeing it as something that you have to dedicate some proper time to, and creating some headspace, whether that means taking yourself off and away for a week somewhere to have some proper thinking time, whatever it is, or breaking a routine, or carving out some time each day. Maybe it's getting up half an hour early or an hour early and going for a walk, and dedicating that time to real sort of focused thinking about where you are in your relationship. I think there are some questions you can ask yourself about whether this is a temporary blip versus the end of a relationship. So I think being able to identify the difference between those two things. Anyone that's had any kind of relationship will know that relationships go through phases, and sometimes they're bad phases. You shouldn't be chucking the towel in the minute that you hit a rocky patch. But it's about trying to identify the difference between a rocky patch and something that's more fundamental. And the more fundamental stuff are the shared values. And I always think, would you want your child to be in a relationship with your partner? Not obviously physically, but, that type of person. Would you recommend your partner as somebody you would think would be a good, positive role model? And if the answer to that is no, then that's a bit of a sign that possibly there is something more fundamental going wrong and at play. There are some typical things as well that you can spot in a relationship that really are death knells, if you like. So there's a famous piece of work done by a guy called John Gottman, and he calls this the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So you can go and look that up. But essentially, um, if there's contempt or criticism, particularly in a relationship, those are really hard things to overcome. They're not things that you can go to relationship therapy and necessarily deal with very easily. So there are some things that make, a relationship more likely to fail than others. So I think understanding and doing a bit of thinking about whether or not this is a blip versus something that's more fundamental is really key. And then I think it's about being able to say what you want and being able to say to your partner, I don't know whether this is a blip or something more fundamental, but realistically, I'm feeling that we need to spend some time on this relationship, and seeing what they say. If you're met with a brick wall, which is another one of Gottman's four horsemen, stonewalling, then again, you've got a question. If someone's not even entertaining letting you in to have that conversation, fundamentally, that's quite a big, I would say, a red flag. You cannot usually get past that. If someone is not prepared to engage, you're pretty stuck. So I think preparing the time, having a deep think about fundamental versus a blip, asking and saying that you want to work on the relationship and asking your partner to meet you halfway with that. I think they're some of the key things. If you're feeling that the relationship is stalling, they're some of the key fundamentals to do in the very first stages.
Kate, I'm so grateful. What amazing tips are these? So, what do you feel are your main lessons as a co founder, as an entrepreneur, as a relationship counselor, as a divorce expert? What are the sort of biggest lessons you feel you have learned throughout this process?
Definitely takes a lot longer than you think it's going to take. When Pip and I set this up, we had this idea that we were going to create this bit of technology, an app that would help you emotionally prepare for the divorce journey. We'd create this app, it would be brilliant, we'd flip it and we'd be out of there in, less than 5 years. That's what we thought. Well, that was 2015, and here we still are. And we've pivoted the business a couple of times since then. So I think it's fine to have an idea and a strong plan, but you've got to mix that with being able to listen to what your consumer ultimately wants. So when we did the app and we launched the app, we got loads of lovely positive feedback. But the one thing that people kept saying to us was, we want you to carry on once we've done all this prep. So our app was, we prepped everybody emotionally, we got all their finances in order, and then we sent them off to a lawyer to get the legals done, because when we set up, we weren't going to do all of the legals, we were just going to do the prep work. And pretty quickly it became clear that people didn't want that, so we had to pivot to include the legals, which we had never conceived of in the beginning, but we obviously then had to include. So I think being able to spot that and listen to the customer rather than just go down what Pip and I just wanted to do, which was build the app and ride off into the sunset, I think that was a really fundamental and key thing. So I think as well, it's tough to get funding, and female funding is particularly tough to get. Less than 3% of funding in Europe went to female founders last year in 2023. It's shocking. So you have to fight for that funding, and you have to be prepared to stick up for yourself with that, because it's really tough. And there's no getting away with that. It shouldn't be, and it would be great when there are more women funders as well as more women seeking funding. But until the tables turn, you've got to be prepared to be really hard about that, because there's no easy route around it. It's hard. It's really hard. So you always need more money than you think. Money always runs out more quickly than you think. So in the early days, you are spending quite a bit of time fundraising, and you have to create time in your schedule for fundraising. You can't run it so you've almost run out of money and then you're going back out. You've got to have a buffer, because it always takes longer than you think. So I think that's really key. I think the other thing is don't be frightened to get stuff out there. I think as entrepreneurs, sometimes we get so passionate about our businesses and our products or services or what we've built that we want it to be perfect. And inventing it is a tiny part of it. We're very good in this country, in the UK, at inventing stuff. We're less good at scaling it and getting it out there. And I think actually the scaling it and getting it out there is really key, because ultimately in this business, the only reason that we are successful is volume. It's the volume we can do. We now draft more consent orders than anybody else in this country. And therefore, that gives us influence and it helps us shape the market and it helps us reach more people. But without that volume, you're just somebody in your own little corner of the world. So if you really want to change things, and I really want to change the way that people think about divorce, the way that people go through divorce, volume is absolutely key to that. So I think that's probably another lesson.
Yeah. Kate, so what are the challenges that you still face with running Amicable?
Well, we have our monthly management meetings, and we have an items causing extra stress column on our plans
I
every
love
month. So
it.
we look back and we celebrate our highlights, and then we have next to our highlights, and here's the things that are causing us extra stress. And at the top of that list, every single month is bandwidth. So the biggest challenge in any of this is bandwidth. It's just always you always have more ideas than you can possibly bring to fruition. There are always more things on your to-do list than you can ever get through. There are always things you could do better, and you have this permanent feeling of never having done anything good enough because you are juggling so many balls and spinning so many plates. So I think the key is you've got to be ferocious in your prioritization. And that's still a challenge that we sort of face every single day, because the bigger you get, the more well known your company becomes, the more offers you get to do things,
Yeah.
the more distractions that come in the way. And therefore you are constantly fighting this battle of which lever do I pull to have the biggest impact in the stage of the business that we're in now. And so you have to be able to say no to lots of things. And that's a constant battle, because we all, if you're doing this kind of thing, you love what you do, you're passionate about your business, you want to go and tell people about it all the time, and you want to go and do all of them, take up all the offers and do that interview and do this and do that. And it's just, you have to be able to prioritize and ruthlessly focused.
Kate, so what kind of a leader are you? How do you show up as a leader?
I think everybody in the business would say I show up with my passion. I am the one that does the rallying cry, that the heart and mind. I am all about hearts and minds. I want to spend time with our colleagues because I want to tell them and I want them to feel the amicable feeling. That's my absolute mission. So I am all about the values. I'm all about the hearts and minds. That's one part of what makes a successful business. You need the other part as well. So you need the person with the discipline and with the processes, and someone who can do all of that part of it. That's not my strength. My strength is talking about the business, is making sure that everybody knows how important each and every single person we ever talk to is, and that we are focused on changing the whole way divorce and separation are thought about in the world, not just in the UK, but in the world. I want to be part of that movement that leaves a positive mark on humanity and says, I have helped break down the stigma that exists around divorce and separation, and I have helped people navigate one of life's toughest challenges. That's what I want. And so that's how I show up. It's in my passion, it's in my, I still do I still do a slot on the induction of everybody that comes into the company, because I want them to hear and feel what this means to me, and I want to lead by example. So I still do sales calls, I still talk to people on the telephone. We offer free 15-minute advice calls to anybody that needs help with divorce and separation. I still do those because I still want to stay in touch with people out there and understand what it is that people need, so that I can create it with Amicable. And that's so important to me.
Kate, and your strength is also to understand what is not in your wheelhouse and to then find partners like your co-founder who takes over the other bit. So tell us about your plans and goals. Where's Amicable going? What does 2025 and beyond look like for you as a company?
Well, since Octopus bought a majority stake in us, we've had funding, and so we're trying to expand and scale as rapidly as possible, and
Yeah,
that's absolutely essential. And I want everybody to have heard of Amicable within the next year. So I don't necessarily think that Amicable is the right solution to every single divorce and separation out there. There are some people where they need the protection of an individual solicitor or the individual court. So, for example, if you're suffering in a domestic abuse situation, or you're
yeah,
in an abusive relationship, or you've got a partner who's hiding assets or disposing of assets,
yeah,
those kinds of behaviors need swift legal action.
yeah.
So, in that scenario, it's really important that people go to a solicitor and get the court orders they need to protect themselves. But I think if everybody in this country has heard of Amicable, then they've got a choice and they can decide whether or not they want to or need to do it in a different way, or whether or not they're curious to find out how they could do it in a kinder and better way. And so that's our next goal. So to get that brand recognition, to get the name out there, and to make sure that if this happens to you, you know where to come. So we're not ever in the business of encouraging divorce or separation, but it's a fact of life, and nearly half of relationships end in divorce. So we have to be there for people if they need us. So I want people to have seen our adverts. I want people to know that we exist, and just to store it in the back of their mind. So if it's a friend or a family member, and they can encourage somebody to take a more amicable route, then they do. So rather than siding with your friend in the name of love and slagging off their partner and telling them how awful they are and they should definitely take them for everything they've got, rather than doing that, I want people to have seen our ads and say, you know what? The best thing I can do for my friend now, if they're divorcing or separating, is try and encourage them to be amicable. And that's what I want to change. So, not just being there for the individual who's going through it, but also changing the conversations we all have, because we all know somebody who's divorcing or separating at some
Yeah.
point in our lives. So it's a conversation that will involve all of us at some point. And I want to help people have the most skillful conversation they can at a time of need.
Kate, and what takeaways would you like our listeners to have from your story?
I've had a mantra since I started this with why not? Why shouldn't it be me? So if I think about, what we've done, and sometimes it takes me aback. I think, gosh, we've come so far. It's been a right old journey, but why shouldn't it be you? That's what I want you to take away. If you've got a good idea and you're self-aware enough to know where your strengths and weaknesses lie, and you can compensate for your weaknesses and really play to your strengths, then why shouldn't it be you? There's nothing stopping you. I am nobody. I'm just a state educated, run of the mill person. I've got nothing particularly going for me in the sense of background or privilege. Um, but ultimately, it's graft and hard work and understanding, where your strengths and weaknesses lie, that I think gives you the opportunity. So if you take anything away from it, it's you can do it. You absolutely can do it. And whatever the obstacles, like if you'd have told me when we started, I would have been stood in the High Court in front of a High Court judge deciding whether or not I was going to prison for 2 years. As a single mum, that would have been an absolute life catastrophe. But you just have to turn up and do your best sometimes. And, you literally you have to just believe in what you do, because if you believe in it, it's not that it will happen, but if you believe in it, you're a good percentage of the way there. I think that's the key. If I'd have doubted myself at that point, or Pip had doubted herself at that point, we'd have been in a very different situation, because as that was happening, we were actually in the middle of a fundraise. So we had to go
Mm.
back to our original investors and say, well, look, we're being taken to court, but we need you to put some more cash in because we can't go out and raise in the middle of this piece of litigation. It's not ethical. So, you know, you've just got to create that belief.
Kate, and thank you for showing us that that is possible, that two women co-founders can get to where you are today, for giving families the choice to separate amicably and making that a thing, and going against what the scenarios that we've seen so far, where many times it's been very, very detrimental to the children and the family members. So I'm so grateful for you to take the time and tell your story today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. It really has. Thank you for having me.